All right, here we go. I'm going to talk through some ways to animate through Photoshop. Now, this is what we'll be using for our first project here, and I'm going to run through how to do it start to finish, but you'll be starting the process a little bit further in because we'll be doing this as a group and we'll have to split up frames so that you're not animating the entire video because that would be a lot, and I'll kind of go through that math in a little bit here. Okay, so when you want to create a rotoscope animation through Photoshop, you have to start by inserting your video and creating layers of frames from that video. So taking what looks like fluid motion and chopping it up into individual images that we will then trace over and create our own animation from. This is a little bit of a complicated process, so I'll be doing this part for you guys, but in the future, if you want to make your own animation and do some rotoscoping again, this video should be helpful for you to know how to do that, even though you won't technically be doing it yourself for this project. So when you want to do that, you will go to File and then Import, and then Video Frames to Layers. You will click on your video, and you will open it. Now, at this point, you should have your video cropped to what you want it to be. If it's not for some reason, you can crop it at this point and do just a selected range of your video. And then what's going to happen here is you're converting it to frames. Most likely, your video is 30 frames per second, meaning for every 1 second that passes, 30 individual images create that appearance of motion. Now, I've talked about before for animation, if we each animated 30 frames per second, that would be way too many frames to do ourselves. So we're going to downscale that a little bit. And for us, for hand-drawn animation, you can get away with a little bit of a choppier look, which is what we're going to go for here to kind of minimize the amount of work we're doing on ourselves. So I'm going to limit it to every 3 frames. And what that's going to do is that's going to take 30 frames per second and cut it in thirds. So we're going to actually have just 10 frames per second. And we can get away with that because it's hand-drawn and it's not going to look that weird because we're animating it ourselves. And you're making a frame animation, and you're going to click OK. All right. So like I said before, I'm doing this part of the process for you. This is information for you if you ever want to make your own animation and kind of, do your own process starting with the video for yourself. So what has happened here is it has shown up as all of these different layers. They're currently all playing at 0.03 of a second, and we want to change that to 0.1 so that it creates 10 frames per second, if that makes sense. But right now, I'll just show you what it looks like. So if I press this play button here, it starts going through. And you can see that the frames are lasting a little bit longer than I want them to, which is why it looks so choppy as an animation. Quick note, most likely when you first open up your project, you're not going to see this window. You have to actually turn that on. And a great tool with Photoshop is if you're ever seeing, or if you're ever not seeing a tool that you need, you're going to want to go to this window tab up here and figure out what tool it is that you need and kind of show that on your screen. So this one is called the timeline because we're working with a video here in Photoshop, so you want to see that timeline. And that's what shows up there. Now, I, again, am doing this part for you, but if for some reason it doesn't transfer over on your file, you'll know how to do this. So a great thing you need to know when you're using tools like Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, all that, are shortcut keys. And I'm going to try my best to make a cheat sheet for you guys of shortcut keys. We'll see if I get that to you day one, not totally sure. But one of the things that is really super helpful is being able to select a ton of things all at once. And the best way to do that is to click on the first thing you want to select, scroll all the way to the last thing that you want to select, hold the Shift key, click it, and that selects everything in between those 2 points. So now I've selected all of my frames, and I'm going to change that 0.03 to 0.1, and that will make a 10 frames per second video. So if I come back, now my frames are moving a little bit faster, more like the video. And again, it's still choppy, but with hand-drawn animation, you can kind of get away with it. So we're going to do the 0.1 frames per second. At this point, I think I've gotten to where I need to go to where you'll actually be doing things. But like I said, you're not starting from scratch with the video. I'm going to actually give you your Photoshop file to start from because we are splitting up the frames per person. So in order to find your Photoshop file, you're going to go to Google Classroom. So you're going to click on this file, which is too large to preview. It's a Photoshop file, so that's pretty big, and plus Google Classroom doesn't really know how to read a Photoshop file. It doesn't, not quite sure what it is, but you're going to open it in a new window, and that should give you the ability to download it. Okay, so now I'm going to download this file, and as long as you're on your HP laptops that have Adobe Suite on them, then that should be fine. You don't want to download this on Chromebook, obviously. We don't have Photoshop on our Chromebooks. So that's going to take a minute here. All right, we are downloaded. So now I'm going to open up that file that I just downloaded, which is just a selection of the frames from this video, which is more like what you'll actually be doing for your project because you're each going to do a section of frames. So file open. Now I'm just going to mention this here because I was having issues with it before. I don't necessarily know if this issue is going to show up on your computer or not. But what was happening was I wasn't finding the files that I was downloading, and I was getting a little frustrated about it. And the problem was this little drop-down menu down here. So if your file that you just downloaded is not showing up, make sure you have selected all formats. And that way everything shows up in your windows here. So here it is. And open. All right, so this is just a selection of frames, 1 through 15 here. And my layers are showing up over here on my layers panel. I have this layer 0 here, and I'm not really sure why, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. You can delete in multiple ways. One is to right-click and then delete layer. Or when you're selected over here in your layers panel, you can click this thing, and it's the same menu. I just don't know why that was there. Doesn't affect anything. Okay. So this process can be a little bit confusing if you don't set it up the correct way. So it's really, really, really important that you pay attention to the whole setup part of this video. Your timeline bar down here is different from your layer panel, and it's important to kind of know how those two things interact. And I can't even fully tell you that I fully understand it, but I do know how to set it up in a way that makes sense. So just make sure you have it all set up correctly. Right now, my layers panel should play like a video. I've got 0.1 as their lasting, so it's actually 10 frames per second. That's what I want. I want to take all of these individual layers and I want to put them all together into a group, and that will help me organize things a little bit better visually, and also it will allow me to select them all at one time a little bit easier. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a folder. And I'm going to call this my video layer because that's where the actual shots of my video are going to go. And I'm going to create an animation on top of that. So same trick that I taught you guys before. Make sure that this is not splitting up your layers. Select the first thing you want to select. Shift and the last thing. And then drag all of that into your folder. Okay. So now, all of these are within my video folder, and I can open and close that at will. Now I'm going to create another folder for my rotoscoping, which is tracing on top of video frames. I need to make sure that I'm rotoscoping in a separate layer than my video frame so that I can take away the video when I'm done with it, right? Layers are the most important thing to understand when you're working with Adobe Suite. It basically just allows you to separate the parts of your image or your video if you're doing animation to be able to take things away, put things back, and just kind of work on them separately. And if it's all just kind of conglomerated into one layer, you're going to really be annoyed later on because it's going to be a lot harder to get rid of things you don't want or to add new things and so on. So basically, I'm going to add a new folder. I'm going to go ahead and shut that. Add a new folder, and this is going to be my rotoscoping layer. This is where I'm adding my animation. Okay, I'm going to add one more layer, and this is just going to be a blank background because right now if I take my video away, it's got those like little checkerboard things, and that means it's a transparent background. I want to add one that's just kind of like a solid color to work on top of so that later I can create my actual like drawing of a background digitally. So in order to add that background here, I'll make that go away so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is just a new empty layer that would be like a transparent background. This is a fill layer, so I'm going to add just a solid color. and I want my solid color to be white. Doesn't really matter what you add at this point. Okay, and then I want to make sure that that is in my far background, so I'm dragging it down. Layers panel here works the same way that it did in Pixlr, so anything on the bottom is behind stuff and anything on the top is in front. So you can reorder your layers by making sure that they're in the correct order on your layers panel. So that's just going to be like a solid color for me. All right, we are ready to start rotoscoping. So another few keys that are going to be super helpful for you is the zoom key, and all you have to do, you could click the actual zoom button over here, which is a magnifying glass, or you could just press the letter Z. And what's great about these tools is they also tell you what their shortcuts are. So see that little parentheses Z showing up there? It's so much faster to just use your keyboard. So memorize a few of those. Again, I'm going to try and make you guys a little cheat sheet, but pressing the letter Z, and then I can zoom in. And then if I hold the Alt button, it turns into a minus and I can zoom out. So that is the quickest way to zoom in and out of your image. Now, obviously, I'm going to create a whole new background for this animation. I really just need to trace this guy and his movement. So when I'm ready to start tracing, I'm going to make sure I have selected layer 1. I'm going to go in order here. And then I'm going to make sure I'm in my rotoscoping folder. You have to make sure you are working in the correct layer, and you know you're in the correct layer when it is selected over here on the layers panel. That's going to be probably the number one thing that trips people up. So if you're ever having trouble, things are going wrong, make sure you have the correct thing selected and you're working in the right layer here. So I'm going to add a new layer for rotoscoping, and I'm going to want it to just be an empty layer here. And this is within my rotoscoping folder, and I know that because if I click this arrow, it disappears. Okay. And I'm going to name this layer the same number as my frame by double-clicking 1. So now I'm going to super double triple check. I have rotoscoping layer 1 selected, and I have frame over here in my timeline number 1 selected. So that means I am looking at frame number 1 and I am tracing on layer number 1. Those numbers always have to match. If they're not matching, then you're going to mess up the order of your video and it's going to get really confusing. Now the tracing part's pretty easy. So make sure you zoom in to whatever makes the most sense so you're able to see however much or however little detail you want. I'm going to try and keep it a little faster for myself here because I'm just trying to give you guys a quick demonstration. And so I'm going to make sure I am selected my rotoscoping layer. I'm going to go to my brush tool. And now your brush options are up here. So you can change the size of your brush if you want it to be super big, super small. You're probably going to just do some detail work with tracing, so keep that a little smaller. Your hardness or softness if you want the edges to be fuzzy or if you want them to be really strong. Again, we're just kind of tracing the contours of the image here, so it doesn't really matter what you want to do. Another shortcut with the brush tool is your bracket key on the keyboard. So if you press left bracket, your brush will get smaller, and if you press right bracket, it will get bigger. That is a great way to quickly change the size of your brush. So I'm going to go back to like 7, keep it kind of small here. And then the color of your brush over here. So I want black, just doing an outline. And now you get to use your handy-dandy little tablet thing. So your tablet might look a little different than mine. I'm using like the medium size. There's a large size, there's a small size. They all do the same thing. It doesn't really matter. As long as you've got it plugged into the USB drive on your computer, it should be turned on. You should see like a little light come on with it, and then you're going to use your pen to actually do your tracing. So as you hover your pen over top of your tablet, you can see the brush move. As you touch your tablet, you should be able to see your tracing. So like I said before, I'm going to be pretty quick here. If I were really doing this for my own project, I would spend a lot of time making sure my tracing is nice and accurate. Now this is where you can have a little bit of fun with things if you want to. So you don't have to trace the exact body, you definitely could, but if you want to put in a little bit of your own artistic style or like imagination into it, you could, right? So let's say I want to make him like an alien guy. Okay, first frame is done. I can double check to make sure I've traced everything by clicking this little eyeball next to my current video layer. And that looks like a thing, so we're going to keep it. All right, now frame 2, click frame 2, click add new layer, rename it layer 2. Now I'm working on layer 2. What happened here is you can still visually see layer 1 underneath my new layer here. I can turn that off by selecting everything and then unchecking that new layer is visible. Okay, so I'm pretty sure the solution to this would be unchecking that new layer is visible button so that when you make a new layer, it shouldn't show your previous layer. Hopefully that works. If it doesn't, the easiest solution is to do the shift select on the first to last and then unclick all of those eyeballs and then go back within each frame and click the one that is supposed to be selected. So we're just going to try that. And then the rest of these don't have anything yet, so I'm going to turn all that off. Okay. We should be fixed as of right now. Yep, okay. So now I'm ready to start tracing frame 2. I have the frame selected, I have the layer 2 selected, and then I can start tracing. Now, remember, I'm going fast here. Okay, now remember I did something weird with his head before. So if I want to continue tracing in that weird way, but maybe I want to view my previous layer, I can click that little eyeball next to it and I can view it. So it can actually show up as I'm tracing layer 2. Now, if I start tracing on top of this, it's going to get kind of hard to see which layer is which. So a quick fix for that is just to turn down the opacity a little bit. So I'm going to click on my layer 1 that I want to see, and I'm going to turn that opacity down to like 50%. That way it's still there, but it's a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to make sure layer 2 is selected, frame 2 is selected, and then I can trace again on top of it. It's not going to be very perfect, mostly because I'm just doing my best to be quick here. All right, now before I move on, make sure I turn that opacity back up to 100. And I don't need to see that in frame 2 anymore. And then frame 3. So make sure 3 is selected, 3 is selected, and do my tracing. All right, frame 4, new layer, rename it to 4. 4 is selected, 4 is selected, same process. All right, let me turn that opacity back to what it needs to be. So I'm just going to cut it short here because I don't want to have to go through all these frames just to show you how it works. I'll show you the tiny bit of animation that I have that's really just 4 frames right now, but we'll, see what that looks like. And I will take away my video so that you don't see that. There he is. So he's starting to move a little bit here. And obviously if I had the rest of the frames, it would be a more complete video. But we got that little bit of motion as he's starting to kind of throw the ball forward. All right, now once you have all of your rotoscoping done for all of your frames, you no longer really need that video layer. You can just work with the tracing that you did in your rotoscoping folder and then your white background, which we will fill with something eventually. Okay, so I can take away my video folder by pressing this arrow and just kind of collapsing it, making sure that eyeball is not on so it's not visible in any of my frames. And now I can start thinking about how I want to add color. And in order to do this, I'm going to create one more folder for myself that's going to be called my color palette. Oops. I don't want that to be within another folder. I'd like that to be its own thing. Okay, color palette. Have that selected, and I'm going to go to my ellipse tool here. It doesn't really matter what shape you have selected. Any one will work. I'm just choosing circles. And then I'm going to add some circles up here. And I'll get into what that is in a little bit. Okay, so now I have a new layer that just added underneath my color palette folder that is an ellipse. I'm going to add another one. And it does this like jumping thing. I'm not really sure why. Every time I add a new circle, it's going to be a new ellipse layer. Go back to my layers tab. Okay, so now I'm at 5 layers. If I would like to edit the shape of them, I can do that. So you can do this in one of 2 orders. One, you could make all of your color palette colors first, or 2, that's cool. You could just start filling in your guy and then create your color palette based on that. So it really doesn't matter what form you take with this. I'll show you, I don't know, starting with the guy, I guess. So make sure those lines are closed. If you see any areas that are open, you'll want to fill those in before filling in with color. So there's an example there right there with that shirt. You want to close that. So let me make sure that that layer is selected. So that's the one I'm working with. This is layer 1. So I'm going to select that, go back to my brush tool, and make sure that's closed. I also just noticed he doesn't have a sleeve here, so I'm going to add him a sleeve. Make sure that's closed. Anything else? Close that one. Okay. Now that I have my tracing layers and they're all closed shapes, I can fill them with color. So let me zoom out again. Again, making sure that the correct layer is selected. So this is layer 1. I'm going to go to my paint bucket tool here, which is down here. If you ever don't see a tool that I'm showing you, go to where it's supposed to be on that sidebar and click your right click button, and that'll show you different options for things that can be there in that sidebar. So make sure you have your paint bucket tool on and select whatever color you would like. So let me enlarge this a little bit so I can see some more of what I'm working with. So I want him to be an alien. I'll make his skin like greenish. Like greenish yellow. Yeah. And then I'll paint bucket in. Now I want to save that color so that I can continue using it later. So I started by putting it in the guy. Now I'm going to select one of these little circles. And that is in a different layer, so it's selecting a new layer now. I think I have to use my direct selection tool, which is down here. Yes, okay, so I selected my circle. Correct layer is selected here, and I'm going to change that fill to that color that I just used, which shows up in recently used. Okay, you might start to get an idea of what I'm doing here. Let me go back to, actually, let me just fill in the rest of my color palette. So that's how you would do it if you were starting with the person. You would fill in all his colors, and then you would change each circle to each different color that you used because they showed up in recent. Or you can go ahead and just pick your circles and do whatever you want to do with those. Start by using the Move tool to select the layer that you want to work on. Selecting this layer, which is ellipse 1, okay? Then I'm going to select the object itself by using that arrow tool, okay? Now I'm going to change the color to what I want it to be. So let's think about like his hair. What hair color? Let's keep him like a blonde alien. There we go. Let me go back to layer select, click the circle. All right, that's that layer. And then I'm going to change that fill, and let's do his shirt color. Let's do like a red. Okay, layer select. You can do this shorter by clicking the V button. Boop. And that selected my layer over here. Now I'm going to select the object itself by clicking this arrow button, which you could use the letter A for. And let's do pants, blue. primary color alien. And let's keep the shoes black, so I'll just keep that circle black there. All right, so now I have all my color palette things visible. I can collapse that folder, I don't need to see that anymore. Go back to my rotoscoping layer. I'm working on layer 1 here. Make sure layer 1 is selected. Go back to my paint bucket tool. Now, I'm going to use something called the eyedropper tool, which technically is over here, but the shortcut is the letter I. So if I click the letter I, it's going to let me select a color. I'm going to choose my color palette, and that automatically loads in that color there. So then when I go to my paint bucket tool, that's the color I'm filling in. See how quick this is? So I select, paint bucket, fill. I select, paint bucket, fill. So that's the beauty of having a color palette that's just right there for you. So I can fill in the colors that I want for these different things. And that way I also know as I animate the entire character, it's going to be the same for the whole animation. So you might notice down here in my timeline, my color palette is only visible in that first timeline. I want it to be visible in all of them. So what I'm going to do is open that up actually to make sure I can select all of it. I'm going to go ahead and make it invisible first. Then I'm going to select everything. And then I'm going to click visible. And it didn't populate. So when that doesn't happen, sometimes Photoshop, I truly don't know. I think it's just because the way that this timeline is, things can be finicky. So you kind of have to try a few different things to see what works. So I tried that group select, it didn't work. So now I'm going to try individually clicking and unclicking each one, and that seems to be doing the trick for me. Okay. Now my palette is visible in every single frame. So as I continue to animate those different layers, I can do that really quickly. So let me go ahead and do that for you. So make sure frame 2 is selected, layer 2 is selected, and then I can go in with my paint bucket tool. Also, you want to make sure all those lines are closed up, so keep an eye on that. Looks like paint bucket tool is also the letter G, so that would be even quicker for me to just use the keyboard. So I for eyedropper, G for paint bucket. Oops. Undo is a great tool to know. Control Z, or if you need to find it here, you can do edit undo. See? All right, select frame, select layer, keep on going. I for eyedropper, G for paint bucket tool. All right, so now I have colored in my 4 frames, which should be pretty simplistic. And then obviously when you're finished with your video, you will hide your color palette so that you don't see it anymore. So let's say you want to add some more detail, like you don't want it to just be solid colors, you can absolutely do that. So if I want to add some like shading or something to my video, I can make sure that layer is selected and go in and go back to my brush tool, and I can add some different shades. Brush tool, okay. And let's say you want your brush to be a little softer now, because I just want to add some shadows, and maybe I even want it to be a little bit see-through, so I can change that opacity. And let's say I want it to be this color, but a little bit darker. So if I change to my eyedropper tool, this color to start out with, but then I can drag it down, make it a little darker. Brush tool, opacity 50%, and so that would be a really nice way to add some detail. Textures. Maybe I want some lines in the hair. So I make those smaller, maybe a little harder. Keep that opacity because I think that's nice. Eyedropper tool, hair, a little bit darker. Back to my brush tool. So that's a really nice way to get some quick detail that can make your animation even more interesting. And you're only doing 15 frames, so doing this on every slide isn't that crazy. Just make sure you have the frame selected and the layer selected, and then as long as that is correct, you should be good to go for all of that. So good way to add some detail there. Now, once you're done with that, you can create your background. All right, so back down to my background layer. I've got that just white background to work on top of. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new invisible layer on top of that so that I can start kind of drawing on top of my background. So I'll pick some color that I like for the board. And I don't know exactly what I want my background to be yet, but I can just start thinking about it. I still have my brush at a certain opacity, so I can bring that up. And I'm running with this alien theme here, right? So I don't know, I'll do some like outer space looking stuff. Use my bracket keys to make my brush bigger. Okay, getting an idea of what I'm going with here. So now I want to make sure that my background layer is visible in all of my frames as well. So select all of them. Hooray! Now we have the makings of the beginning of a video. And that's it. Okay, so when you are done animating all your layers, adding any detail that you want, and drawing in your background, stop that. Okay. Make sure the frames are exactly the visual way that you need them to be. So doing that, selecting all of them, making sure everything's unclicked so that you don't see your color palette, you don't see the video frames or anything like that in it. Then you're going to go to your file, export, and you're going to click render video. Decide what you want it to be called. This was just my tiny little test for it. Decide what folder it's going to go into. And then the only thing you should have to change down here is going to be that frames per second. Because remember, we wanted it to be 10 frames per second. Because we're doing hand-drawn animation and we're trying to speed up this process a little bit. So change that to 10 and then render. And let's see how we did. Okay, so like I said before, it's a short video. I only animated 4 frames, right? So only get like a 40% of a second, right? I don't know. But that's the basic idea. So once you have exported your video, you will turn that into me on Google Classroom. So you'll just have to upload that video file to Google Classroom, and then I should be able to download those all and put them all together into one video, and that would be wonderful. So that should be all you need to know for animation. We're really just using the brush tool here. Understanding layers is kind of the most important lesson that you'll learn from this, and understanding the brush tool and the paint bucket tool, which will be helpful in other things. So that should be all you need to know. Sorry for how long this video was. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you can come back to it and figure out how to do your own rotoscoping later if you want to.